if this is my very first node, right? So I need to make sure that my last and my first is because this is the first and last, right? So both of them should point to the same node. So when you're adding element, you have to maintain two separate, basically, other references, right? So first and last. So if you have nothing in the list, right? So if it's list empty, that means the first and last, they're both pointing to null, right? The list is empty. There's nothing in this. There's no element stored, so there's no node. So that means the first and last, they're both pointing to null. But immediately when I create my very first node, then not only I have to maintain the first and tell the first that this is your new node, also I have to tell the last that this is your last node too, because they're both the same, right? So this is my last and this is my first. They're both going to point to the same place. So that's for sure, we have to do that, right? So now let's go to the next scenario. So far, so good. So if it is empty, both are null. If you add the very first one, they're both going to point to that node, right? Now let's add another one. I have this one, and now I'm going to create a new node. Now the question is now, where should I add this new node? Right now, this is my first and last, right? So both of them pointing to this one. Where should I add this new node? Should I add it here or should I add it here? To the first? You want to add it to the first?
What order do we have it in?
So that basically that tells us that we have two options, right? We have two options. We can add it, and that for us, the both options is going to be order of basically same order probably. We don't know. So maybe it's not. Yes.
What if you have, like, let's say you put it on the first one, then you have to like get the reference to the new one for the first, and then push the other one for the next one.
We don't pushing anymore, right? We just have to copy the address, right? That pushing is not happening here, or shifting is basically not happening here because you don't have, they're not back to back in the memory. You just have to change the address. So basically, we have two options. If this is my new node, basically I want to add nodes to the beginning of my linked list, then I have to say first, no longer point to that node because that's not the first node anymore, and I'm going to be the first node from now on. So first is going to point to the new node that we just created. And then we also have to tell this node that who is your next. Who is the next for this node now? The previous first node, right? Or whoever was the first node before. Now it's going to be right next to this one, right? So this is all going to point to the that node. So basically, when we're adding a new node and we decided that we're going to add this new node to beginning of our linked list, that means I have to basically tell my first that no longer point to that previous node, and this new node is your first. And also, this new node has to point to the next, and that next is going to be the one that was previously was the first node, right? So that's how we're basically going to grow. We're growing this list always from the beginning, and basically everything is go from there. What's going to happen to the pointer to the last? Do I have to do anything with last? So last was pointing to this one, right? So let me draw again. So at this scenario that we have here, this is my original first node, right? And both of them, and that was the only element in the list, the first and only element. So first and last are both pointing to this one. Then I decided I want to add a new element, but I want to add it to the first or the beginning of this list. So definitely then I have to tell my first that you no longer is going to point into that old one, and you need to point to this new node. And so this new node now become my first. And as we just discussed, that this new node also should point to the old first node, basically, right? But who is going to be the last node? Do I have to maintain the last as well? The same one, right? So the last is going to stay the same because you just keep the very very first one you add is going to become your last, and it's going to stay the last one all the way, because as you keep adding elements, you keep adding element to the beginning of this list, right? And so you always have to just keep maintaining the first only, right? And the last is going to stay the same. You don't have to maintain it anymore. The only time you have to maintain the last is you either only have one element or no element, right? That's the only time that you either have to make it null or you're going to make it to point to that only element in the list. After that, it's always going to be, you know, on the same exact basically node. So that means we need to, when we're writing the code for this is something we always have to keep that in mind. So we need to always know if there is only one single element in the list or not. If it's only one single element in the list, or we don't have any element in the list, we have to make sure we update the value of the last. But if, you know, if we have more, then we don't have to worry about it. So that's something that we have to, when we implement, we have to think about it as well, right? That's why we do analysis, we think about it, and we draw things so we can have a good understanding of what's going to happen. So let's implement that.